when you're experiencing the loss itself, and even in the 12 or so hours afterwards, it's very emotional and very easy to look at and say, oh, it's a disaster, and we've ruined this, we've ruined that, and we had the opportunity to do this, had the opportunity to do that. But after having kind of that second night to sleep on it, and now being almost 2 full days removed, I think the perspective changes quite a bit. I'm very interested to know what your thoughts are. And how you view things now that you've had a little bit of time to marinate and, kind of look ahead for this South Carolina team. Where's your head at in terms of, coming away from the other night? Because that's not a slouch of a program that you lost to. The 4 by their name wasn't for decoration. That was because they were legitimately one of the best 4 teams in the country, and that's going to be reflected when they get one of the number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament coming up here in just a couple of weeks. Tennessee is an amazing program, and they've always been good, but they've been elevated to an even different level this year, bringing in Dalton Knecht from Northern Colorado, somebody that nobody expected to be the superstar that he's turned out to be. Dude is an All-American type player. Dude is going to be a first-round pick in the NBA draft. Dude is the lifeblood of what that team does, specifically from an offensive standpoint, and we saw that on full display the other night. He's so good to the point where Lamont Paris, going back to game number 1, said, yeah, we knew he was going to score his points. We just had to limit everybody else. Scored 31 in the first game, scored 26 the other night. Unfortunately, South Carolina wasn't able to limit the guys around him. And that was one of many factors as to why South Carolina came up just short, and it was only by 7 points. I go back to a season ago, the 2 times South Carolina played Tennessee and got their teeth absolutely kicked in by 40-some-odd points in both those contests. They've come a long way since then. And I think that's the perfect litmus test to show that. Now, yes, you would have loved to have beaten Tennessee twice in the regular season and been able to have the opportunity to lay claim to at least part of the SEC regular season championship should you have had that win. But that's the thing about this loss for South Carolina is it doesn't change anything. There's really, outside of that opportunity to win some hardware, which would have been great, would have been cool, and would have been a great feather in the cap for Lamont Paris in year number 2, but all your goals are still ahead of you. If you go on the road tomorrow against Mississippi State and win the game, and Tennessee helps you out a little bit, their game against Kentucky, you'll be a top 4 seed with the bye in the SEC tournament. And I'll get into all those tiebreaker scenarios and what the specifics of what you have to watch for as a Gamecock coming up tomorrow are. But regardless, you can still get one of those double byes, which is huge, and you're locked in to the SEC tournament, the NCAA tournament, which, a couple weeks ago, we weren't so sure. But South Carolina's rebounded. They've done enough in these past couple games to secure a spot. Now, what seed that is, we don't know yet. Could be a 5 or 6 seed. And, if worse comes to worse and you lose on Saturday and then you get bounced in game 1 of the SEC tournament, maybe you fall to 7 or something like that. But still, you're solidly in the NCAA tournament, which is the most important thing. And who knows what happens when you get there? Who knows what happens as far as your matchups go? And maybe you make a run or maybe you get bounced. It's tough to tell. But you still have all your goals in front of you for what you can still accomplish during this season. And that Tennessee loss does not derail that in the slightest. Want to head out to the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Barron wants to weigh in his thoughts, and now that we're 2 days removed from that Tennessee loss. Barron, thanks so much for your call. What's on your mind this morning?
Hey, thank you. I was just thinking it was a good game for Carolina to play before these tournaments because Tennessee, they have a quick, smart defense, and not so much on offense. I noticed they missed about 7 little layups around the goal in the latter part of the game. I think Knecht missed 4 layups, didn't he? I mean, toss it, roll around and roll off. But Tennessee has a tendency. I noticed they control the offensive board, and they're just all around a good ball team. And it was really good for Carolina to get in that situation because Tennessee has a tendency to relax a little bit. They'll get 10, 12 points ahead. It just that drives the coach crazy. But they'll relax, but then they'll turn the heat on again right quick. But anyway, I just wanted to run that by. I hate what anybody say about the offensive board, but now they craze the offensive board. Tennessee does.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Thank you so
Yeah, I appreciate your call there, Baron. That's a good point that you bring up, and they are a good offensive rebounding team, and we saw that on display. The other night in this game against South Carolina, and I think that's an interesting way that you pose that. That it's almost a good experience to go up against a team like that prior to jumping into tournament play. Where in South Carolina, as we've talked about this entire season, is a team that likes to play that slow pace style of basketball and play very physical and really grind you out. Well, Tennessee does that too. Now, Tennessee's offense is a little bit more high-flying than what South Carolina's is, but they still play that aggressive style of defense. And when you look at the game from the other night, essentially South Carolina was playing a team that ended up being a little bit better at them than their own game. And that's one of those things that, can hopefully prove as kind of a wake-up call, kind of a good, starting off point for what can hopefully be a good run through these next couple of tournaments for South Carolina, because and you did have the recent losses to Auburn and LSU, but those games weren't quite as tooth and nail as this one was the other night. You had the just brutal blowout loss to Auburn, and then you blew the lead to LSU, a game that you certainly let slip through your fingers. But this game the other night was going toe-to-toe with legitimately one of the best teams in the country. And, yeah, you came up short and, would have loved to have captured the SEC regular season crown over the course of that game. But still, it's something that, again, and that goes back to my main point of, looking at this 2 days removed as opposed to just the day after, that there's a lot of good that you can take away from that game. Certainly things to improve on, certainly things to work on, but being able to say, hey, that's a team in Tennessee that might be in the Final Four, and we only ended up 7 points short. We gave them all we could handle, and their all-American type player went out there and scored a bunch of points. The other complements they had around them scored a bunch of points. I brought the stat up yesterday. Ziegler and Adu combined for 8 points in that first contest, 27 the other night. That's a big difference. And that's one of the many differences in why South Carolina came up short in this contest. But again, I hope, and I think we all hope, that provides that little spark that you need to go on some kind of run over the next couple of weeks. To say, hey, kind of brings you back down to earth a little bit, allows you to look in the mirror and say, hey, we're not invincible. We have flaws. We have things that we need to work on. How do we improve on those things? Now, yes, it's a short turnaround going from playing Tennessee on Wednesday night to taking on Mississippi State this upcoming weekend. But especially if you have the benefit of getting the double bye in the SEC tournament, that's more time to reflect. That's more time to improve on things. That's more time to fine-tune what you're already doing so you can be as close to perfect as possible rolling into the SEC tournament. Again, hopefully with the double bye where it gives you at least that extra day of rest as opposed to playing earlier on in the SEC tournament. So it's one of those things, and you don't want to just completely write off a loss and say, oh, it's no big deal. It was a big deal. That was the biggest game in the history of Colonial Life Arena. The atmosphere and the energy in there was unreal, and that resonated a lot with the players. You saw Meechie Johnson being very emotional after the game and, talking, or according to Lon Cooper, wanting to give the seniors their proper exit for what has been a very, very magical season for South Carolina, particularly when you talk about the games that got played at, at Colonial Life Arena. But hopefully, again, looking at this loss in the rearview mirror and saying, okay, here's what we did well, here's what we need to improve on. How do we make ourselves better for not only this weekend against Mississippi State, but next weekend in the SEC tournament and following that in the NCAA tournament to hopefully put together a couple wins? Because, when you look at the fan base as a whole, I don't think anybody's expecting this team to make a Final Four run necessarily. Would it be great if they did? Absolutely. And we would all, revel in it and enjoy every second of it, hopefully as best we could, much like, the fan base did back in 2017. Coincidentally enough, that Final Four was also out in Phoenix. But, man, if you get to the tournament and you win 2 games, we're going to be talking about the season forever. You know what I mean? It's very special, and it helps that it did come out of nowhere as opposed to being like, okay, well, we expect South Carolina to be a tournament team on a year-in, year-out basis. What we're witnessing is special, and I really hope that despite the loss on Wednesday night, that is the fuel and motivation they need to put together a good performance over these next couple weeks of both the SEC tournament as well as the NCAA tournament too. But before you get to those, you got to get through Mississippi State this upcoming weekend. We'll dive into that matchup here a little bit from Chris Jans as well as Coach Paris ahead of tomorrow's game out there in Starkville to wrap up the regular season for both teams. Two teams that played each other to start the regular season all the way back in January. Quick reminder, as always, you can watch us on the Game TV, sponsored by our friends at Shepherd's Glass. Just youtube.com, search the Game TV, subscribe to us, hit the bell icon to stay notified so you can be notified whenever we have video going on or uploading a video as well. And you can also listen to us on the Game TV. Just go to the App Store, search the Game TV, or excuse me, 1075 The Game app. Just go to the App Store, search 1075 The Game, listen to us wherever you go. More conversation about this men's basketball team ahead of their final regular season contest up next here on The Game. Oh, as we are in the month of March, that means it is about time to start filling out some brackets. And I can't think of a better place to associate your bracket with than with our friends over at Twin Peaks. Go online to twinpeaksbracketchallenge.com before March the 21st for your opportunity to fill out one of those brackets and revel in some of the prizes that Twin Peaks has to offer. Up to $2 million and more other epic prizes are available, and each lodge will be giving out a $50 gift card to the top bracket from each and every lodge that is entered. Again, twinpeaksbracketchallenge.com. You have until March 21st to fill it out, and while the tournaments are going on, head down to the lodge at Twin Peaks. Enjoy all the amazing food, TVs as far as the eye can see, all those amazing beverages, including those 29-degree draft beers at Twin Peaks down in the Vista. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Friday morning, getting you set for a full weekend slate of Gamecock sports. And don't worry, we'll get to all of them as the morning goes along. Quick reminder coming up at 10:15, Elijah Campbell going to be checking in with us once again from the SEC Women's Tournament up there in Greenville, helping set the table for today's matchup between the Gamecocks and the Aggies of Texas A&M after they defeated Mississippi State in their game yesterday up there in Greenville. And all of Elijah's coverage up there in Greenville is sponsored by our friends over at Cool Care Heating and Air, and everything that you see from him on social media is brought to you by Atkins Law, all the stuff you see on 107.5 The Game's Twitter account and everything like that is brought to you by our friends over at Atkins Law. Jump back into this conversation about South Carolina men's basketball and moving on, getting set for this weekend's contest against Mississippi State, which is very important to both teams. Coach Paris the other night after the loss against Tennessee talked about moving on and focusing on the next opponent.
I mean, we just got to play. We got to just go to the next thing and play. You know, we're still playing for. If we win, I think we guarantee ourselves a double bye. I don't know how many times that's happened. You know, I told these guys there's still significant milestones out there, and that's only superseded by all the milestones that we've already achieved with this particular group. But it's nice that you still have some out there. I told them that maybe the SEC wasn't ready for us to be the regular season champs yet, so we'll have to put that on hold and you know, hope to get it back together and go to Nashville and play well and you know, maybe we'll end up being the SEC conference tournament champs. So, but yeah, you just got to go to the next thing. You got to just get to the next thing and get ready to play again when you know you're still playing for plenty.
And it can be tough, especially after a highly emotional, you know, game and environment that you had in Colonial Life Arena the other night, to just shut it off and focus on what lies ahead. But I have a lot of confidence in them being able to do this because it's something that we've talked about so much this season with this team and why they've been so good and so successful. It's the veteran presence. It's the veteran leadership. It's guys that have played a lot of basketball, namely the ones that got honored as seniors the other night with Talon Cooper, BJ Mack, and Stephen Clark as well. Guys that have just been around, that they've seen and done just about everything in the game of college basketball, faced a lot of adversity, faced, you know, tough losses and having a rebound after that. Having those guys at the forefront of your team, I think, goes a long way into helping everybody else get re-locked in and get prepared for whatever that next challenge that lies ahead is. And that challenge just happens to be the team that you opened up SEC play with. Now you're going to close out SEC, at least regular season play, with the same squad, that being the Mississippi State Bulldogs, coached by Chris Jans. Here's Chris Jans following their loss to A&M the other night, talking about how big this game is and all the games they have going forward for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see how it feels going into it. Certainly it's something that we'll talk about leading up to the game, but you know, the Kentucky game at home was a big game. At Auburn was a big game. Tonight was the Super Bowl. You know, Saturday's going to be no different. That's been the case for us all year long. You know this. We treat them like they're the biggest game of the year, regardless of who we're playing. And certainly, the difference is, you know, opportunities are running out. You know, we've got one more opportunity in the regular season to get a big win that we need for this particular team to, you know, increase our resume and just, you know, get ourselves in a better position. And we'll talk plenty about it as we get ready to tip it up.
And I think it's important to look at the situation that Mississippi State finds itself in. Going back to the latest edition of Bracketology, which was released on Tuesday this week, I believe. So before any of the non-conference games, or excuse me, any of the weekday conference games got played in the SEC. Oh, excuse me. Actually, they have updated it here. So let's see where they end up falling now as I'm kind of scrolling through here, seeing where I can find them. But going back to the other day, heading into their midweek game, taking on Texas A&M, Mississippi State found itself as a 9 seed. Now, they had slipped a little bit as of late, but they were still in the NCAA tournament at that point in time. Looking now, they're currently listed as a number 10 seed. So they have fallen at least one spot with that loss to Texas A&M. So you're looking at a team that is going into today and next week, or excuse me, this weekend and next weekend at the SEC tournament, really needing some wins, which, by the way, South Carolina still finds itself as a number 6 seed. Lenardi has them matching up with the winner of the playing game between Villanova and New Mexico in the East region, which would be taking place up in Boston. But focusing on Mississippi State, this is a team that is not sure about their ultimate destiny in the NCAA tournament, and a game like tomorrow against a quad 1 opponent in in South Carolina gives them the opportunity to bolster their resume a little bit more and make more of a case for them making the NCAA tournament. So again, they're going to throw everything they can at South Carolina, because at this point they have virtually nothing to lose, and they're probably going to have to put together a couple of games at next weekend's SEC tournament as well to feel better about their odds for making the NCAA tournament. I do think it's interesting to look back on when these two teams faced off the first time, again, opening conference play in early January, and kind of focusing on things now, because both these programs are a lot different than they were at that point in time. And speaking specifically for South Carolina, who had obviously had a great run through the non-conference slate, and, we're feeling good about it. I feel like that was a team that was still figuring itself out a little bit, and a fan base that was still trying to figure out how good this team was actually going to be. And that was a very hard-fought game in Colonial Life Arena to open up conference play. South Carolina ends up picking up the 68-62 win, and that knockdown, drag-out, kind of slow-paced, grinding defensive performance like we know that both teams are capable of. But it was a few weeks later, I think it was that Tennessee game at the end of the month, there, until people finally said, yeah, this team's legit. And on the flip side of things, Mississippi State, a team at that point in time that was 11-2 through their non-conference slate, feeling really, really good about themselves, comes in and loses their first game in conference play, kind of wondering where they stood as far as, where the pecking order of the SEC was going to play out for them. And as it stands right now, what are they, 7th overall? One game over 500 in SEC play. And again, probably not where they expected themselves to be this season, but it's where they are, and it's what they're having to deal with at this, at this point in time. And I'll go back. Colin Murray-Boyles was coming off the bench at that point in time for South Carolina. He was still on his road to recovery from mono, and somebody that was still trying to gain his strength back to get to the full potential of what he could be as a player. In that game, he had 17 minutes with 8 points and 2 rebounds. So nothing really to write home about. A solid performance nonetheless, but we've obviously seen him explode in the weeks and months since, as now legitimately one of the best players on this team. On a similar note, you look on the other side of things, I'll look at a guy like Josh Hubbard, who is also a true freshman. And has kind of had a similar trajectory to what we've seen with Colin Murray-Boyles, was a bench player earlier on in the season in that matchup against South Carolina. Did have a pretty solid performance, put up 13 points and 4 rebounds in 23 minutes off the bench. But this is a guy that has since absolutely exploded on to the scene and emerged as one of the best true freshmen in all of the SEC. Has scored 23 or more points in their last 4 games, including 2 games in the 30s against LSU and Kentucky. Now, he's not the biggest guy in the world, 5'11", so he's not grabbing rebounds the way that Colin Murray-Boyles is. They're definitely different types of players, but as far as the impact that they've had on their respective teams, it can't be, overlooked what Josh Hubbard has been able to do for this team so far this season. The best three-point shooter in the SEC as well, so that's something going to be able to look out for too. When you talk about Mississippi State, they got a couple of really good bigs that are great at grabbing rebounds, and Tolu Smith and Cameron Matthews, 2 guys that you're certainly going to have to deal with if South Carolina wants to go in there and win this game in Stark Vegas this upcoming weekend. Momentum is worth something, though, to me. And when I look at this Mississippi State team, you can't help but take a look at their schedule and the ebbs and flows that they've had this year through conference play, where they went on a 5-game winning streak with Georgia, Missouri, Arkansas, Ole Miss, and LSU. Now, those aren't all the top teams of the SEC by any means, but 5 wins in a row is 5 wins in a row, as we've seen from South Carolina on their own respective streaks during the season. But the last 3 games, Kentucky, Auburn, Texas A&M, all losses. So they're not exactly riding into this game with a high wave of momentum, but going into Starkville is always a tough place to play. And South Carolina, again, should expect a rock fight, grind it out type of defensive battle, which we know they're good at. They came up short the other night against one of the best in the country at doing that. And on paper, South Carolina should be the one to come out on top coming up on Saturday. Again, the matchup predictor doesn't like South Carolina, favoring the Bulldogs by 74.5%. But South Carolina has a built-in motivation of trying to secure one of those top 4 spots in the SEC tournament. They do need Tennessee to help them out by beating Kentucky on Saturday as well, as one of the many tiebreakers of trying to figure this out before next weekend's SEC tournament. We'll have plenty more on this with Elijah Campbell coming up a little bit later on in the show. We'll dive into some baseball coming up next as they get set to take on the Longwood Lancers this upcoming weekend as non-conference baseball play continues for the Gamecocks. That's all coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Friday morning on The Game. Reminder once again, welcome back into the Extra Point, by the way. Reminder once again, lot of women's basketball coming up today. Have 12 o'clock tip between the Gamecocks and the Aggies of Texas A&M. Pregame coverage is going to start right here on the game at 11:30. Before then, though, coming up at 10:15, our guy Elijah Campbell going to give us the last check-in before the tournament begins for the Gamecocks. He'll be calling in and giving us his thoughts on what he's seen so far at the tournament and what to expect today out of the Gamecocks in their game against the Aggies. That's all sponsored by our friends over at Cool Care Heating and Air. Baseball also in action this weekend, as I mentioned, taking on the Longwood Lancers. And it's very interesting when you talk about the schedule for college baseball, because very similarly to what college basketball does, you have almost all of your non-conference games, all of your non-conference series, that is, take place in that first month of the season. Then you have your midweeks against the Georgia States and the Winthrops and all that kind of stuff once you get into SEC play. But on the weekends, it's dedicated to conference play, which are obviously the most important games at the end of the day. I like the fact that they kind of get those out of the way in the first month. You have the chance to play 3 or 4 series, and then you move on to onto the games that really matter. I feel like with college basketball, especially with how early it starts now in November, that non-conference slate can get a little monotonous, especially when you're a power program and you can't always glean a ton from playing smaller teams like you do through the month of November, December. You're like, let's get to conference play and let's see what this team's really made of, as similarly to what South Carolina was able to do when they took on Mississippi State the first time to start the season. And that's kind of how I feel with, for the most part, with the exception of Clemson last weekend, the caliber of opponents that South Carolina's played in the non-conference slate in baseball. It's like you don't glean a whole lot from it because they're certainly not the highest caliber. Take a look at this Longwood team. They're 7-5 coming into the season. It is worth noting they score a lot of runs. This is a team that averages 9.8 runs per game, which is actually 22nd best in the entire country. And I mentioned something similar the other night against the Citadel. That was a team that themselves had scored a lot of runs so far this season, and South Carolina did a really good job of containing them and shutting them down for the most part. So hopefully that's a similar situation here with Longwood. They scored 27 runs in their season opener against Siena. That was a 27-13 win. It looks like a football score, funny enough, but they've also scored 12. They've scored 14. They've scored 15. They've scored 15 again. Those are all their high-scoring ones, but even in the middle-scoring games, even games they've lost, they're scoring 6, 7, 8, 9 runs. So runs in that range for sure. So that's something that could test the South Carolina pitching staff a little bit coming up this weekend. But we'll see how much of an effect that has. Longwood's not a power hitting team by any means. They've only have 5 home runs on the season so far through 12 games. But one area to certainly keep an eye on, that 3 through 5 in their lineup, which is the meat of your order and where most of your hits should be coming from, and that's Hayden Hurston, 3-hole, Drew Cramp at cleanup, and then Noah Campanelli hitting in that 5 spot. They are all 3 among the best hitters in all of the Big South so far to start this season. So again, that could be a lineup that might give South Carolina a little bit of trouble from a pitching standpoint, but we'll see as the series gets rolling coming up later on today. As far as their pitching staff goes, it's very interesting kind of looking over their numbers so far this season. They've not really let any of their pitchers go too deep into into their starts this upcoming season. I look at a guy like Brenton Fish that is their usual Saturday starter. He's put up good numbers this season, but hasn't gone past 3 innings, which is interesting to note, because typically if you're having a good pitching performance, that the hope is that obviously maybe you can go close to the entire game, but if nothing else, maybe somewhere around the 5th or 6th inning, if you're dealing well enough. And unfortunately, Longwood just does not seem to have the endurance in their arms necessarily to go that deep in these respective games. So despite that, their weekend guys in their limited amount of roles don't give up a ton of runs from everything that I've seen. So we'll see if South Carolina can change that. And again, I mentioned Brenton Fisher, one of their projected weekend starters, the other being Ethan Walker, and then lastly, Guillermo Garcia Jr. Again, all those guys putting up really solid numbers, and we'll see if South Carolina can skew those numbers a little bit with some high-level performance against them this upcoming weekend. It is important to note when talking about baseball where you're going to be able to find these games this weekend. Tonight's game starts at 7 o'clock. Pregame coverage is 6:45 right here on The Game. Tomorrow, because we have men's basketball in action on the road at Mississippi State, the baseball game will be at 3:45 on our sister station, ESPN 1320 WISW, 4 o'clock first pitch for that game. And then on Sunday, no matter what happens with the women's team out in Greenville, this Sunday baseball game will also be on 107.5 The Game, 1:15 pregame for a 1:30 first pitch there. So hopefully you're caught up on that. Again, a lot of shifting and moving around because so many sports in action this upcoming weekend. But today and Sunday, you should be able to find the respective baseball games here on 107.5 The Game. We'll continue the baseball conversation coming up next. Our guy intern Joe going to call in and chat for a few minutes. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Friday on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Friday morning, getting you set for a busy, busy weekend of Gamecock sports. And it is spring break, and our guy intern Joe from Gamecock Central not in town this week, but that does not mean he's not going to be on the show. Joining us now on the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Intern Joe, thanks for taking a few minutes. I got to ask, how is intern Joe spending his spring break this week?
Yeah, Tyler, as always, appreciate you having me on. Intern Joe is spending his spring break back home with some family back in South Bend. The weather is lovely today, high of 53 and rain, so really soaking in the rays this spring break.
I was going to say, it hit like 72, 73 here yesterday and sunny. Like, it was almost a tease for what spring should be. You need to get back down here.
Yeah, apparently, golly.
But looking ahead to this weekend, again, so much going on with basketball and everything, but baseball finds itself right in the midst of it. And again, we haven't had you on since this past weekend series against Clemson, which wasn't ideal, losing both those games by 1 run and, getting swept through 2 games. Still hopefully going to get to be able to make up that 3rd game later on this season. But, despite the losses, you still feel pretty good about where this team is, though there are certainly some areas that need improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about those areas of improvement. I'm sure these guys are tired of hearing about, how many guys they've left on base. It's been the story. It was the story for the Clemson series. Kind of worked its way into the midweek. They had a hitters meeting on Tuesday. Seemed to work a little bit on Tuesday. They got the job done, and then also on Wednesday also got the job done as well. But, yeah, these guys are tired of hearing about it. They have one opportunity this weekend before the SEC play kicks up. To really, go out there and show that they can bring the guys home. They're tied for, the nation's lead in walks with Ole Miss with 116, I believe, was the number. So, they're getting guys on. They just got to bring them home. It's that clutch hitting. And, I guess now is the time that you want to be, going through this struggle, right, in the non-conference schedule before you get into the SEC play. Because if you get into the SEC play and you can't bring guys home, you're going to lose a lot of games that you shouldn't. So, plain and simple, and they know that they got to tune that up this weekend. I'm sure they're tired of hearing about it, and they want to squash all of the negativity surrounding leaving guys on base.
Well, and that's the thing, and you mentioned what Coach Kingston talked about with the hitters meeting the other day. That was on Tuesday. It's not something that's going to get corrected overnight. And in their 2 midweek games they played, including the abbreviated one against Davidson the other day, they still left a fair amount of runners on base in both those games. So again, it's not something that's changing right away. But you have this series against Longwood this weekend. You have a midweek game against Georgia State next weekend. But yeah, when you go into Oxford and taking on Ole Miss in series number 1, your first true road test of the season, minus the 1 game on the road at Clemson this past weekend, you better have cleaned that up because, as we know, pitching is abundant throughout the SEC, and those runs are going to be at a premium. If you're routinely leaving 7, 8, 9, 10 guys on base every single game, and you're losing 3-2, 4-5, that kind of stuff, you're going to point your finger directly at that and say that's the reason why they're not winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pitching staff has done their job, right, for the most part. They're progressing into, getting down to 1 to 2 runs. And all of these pitchers really are only allowing 1 to 2 runs per outing, and they've all looked really good. The strikeouts have been up. Obviously you want to see that continue. But this pitching staff certainly doing their job. They just need the offense to follow suit, and, I have no doubt that they will.
Speaking of that pitching staff, yesterday they announced the rotation for this weekend. Still have Eli Jones going tonight, have Dylan Eskew scheduled for tomorrow, but they listed TBA coming up on Sunday. Now, this past weekend, because things got moved around with one of the games getting rained out against Clemson, you had Eskew starting game number 2, which was on Sunday, and they moved Roman Kimball to the bullpen. Kimball pitched perfectly fine, as just about everybody did over the course of the weekend for 2 games that you ended up losing. But it's very interesting because it seems like they're almost kind of leaving the option open to maybe bring in Kimball from the bullpen in one of these 2 nights and leave the option open for somebody else to start on Sunday if need be. How do you read into this coming out yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I read into it kind of similar to the way that you did, right? I think they just like to have the option, right? Kimball obviously coming off of the latch trade, but he's certainly progressed up to, starting potential. Like he should be good to go from everything that I know up to this point, right? I think it is just more of an option thing because, Kimball brings a lot of fire, and so, you want a guy like that out of your bullpen. And again, it pretty much just gives you the option to start whomever you need to. on Sunday, depending on how the rest of the series goes. And if you need to bring a Matthew Becker or a Roman Kimball out of the bullpen on Saturday, now you have the option to do so. And there's a lot of guys that are capable of starting games in this pitching rotation. Eddie Coppers looked great on the midweeks. Ty Good has also shown that he can start some games too. Garrett Gainey prepared the season like a starter, which is why you saw him go so long in that Clemson game. So there are a lot of guys capable of starting games, which is another reason why I think they left it open, just to have that option. And, you don't really have to have a firm 1, 2, 3 guys at this point in the season. Now, granted, you would like, a rotation to be established by Ole Miss next weekend, but at this point, even into SEC play a little bit, you can kind of toy with the rotation a little bit to figure out what you want.
Again, talking to our guy, intern Joe, about the upcoming baseball series this weekend, taking on Longwood. That's something that I feel like we haven't dove into as much when talking about this team. We focused a lot on what the starters have been able to do, and particularly, we lofted our praise at a guy like Eddie Copper for what he's been able to do in the midweek. But, man, this bullpen has been so good. You mentioned Ty Good. You mentioned Garrett Gainey. You mentioned, we talked about McCreary the other day coming in, having a really solid outing. Pitzer in the innings that he pitched the other night against Davidson. Like, this is a really, really solid bullpen. And, again, when you talk about getting into the thick of SEC play, yeah, you want your starters to be good, but those late innings of work holding off, some of these high-powered offenses that you're going to be seeing on a week-in and week-out basis, you need that strong bullpen. And yes, you can take it with a grain of salt based on the opponents that they've played, but there's a lot of reason for optimism for what South Carolina is bringing out of the pen this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly gone, against our preseason predictions, right? I think going into the year, we thought this offense would be leading the way at this point with all of the veteran bats that they have in it, all the guys that they're returning. And then the pitching staff would be struggling, but it's kind of the opposite, right? The bats have been struggling to get going. And now, granted, they have had a lot of success as well, but just leaving guys on base, that's the biggest thing. But this pitching staff has really stepped forward, especially being as inexperienced as they were, really have stepped up. The K rate has been up. And then you also brought up the bullpen, Tyler. The junkyard dog, Chris Veach, is another name that you didn't mention. This bullpen is filled with junkyard dogs, man. Like guys that come out of the bullpen ready to put out fires. Fiery guys, too, that bring the energy, and it's exactly what you need coming out of the bullpen in the SEC and at a place like South Carolina because, the atmospheres are great at Founders Park, some of the best in the country, if not the best in the country at Founders Park. So when you have a guy coming out of the bullpen with fire, the crowd is going to play into that, and it's exactly what you need to close out a game against a tough opponent.
And I think that's a perfect, way to loft praise at Matt Williams, who was brought in to shore up this pitching staff that did struggle quite a bit last season. Again, he's a guy that's been around the game of baseball for a long time, somebody that Mark Kingston was very high on when he's hired him. And again, we're only talking about a small sample size through, 13 games so far this season, but pitching for the most part has lived up to what we hoped it was going to be so far.
Yeah, absolutely. The Matt Williams complaints have been few and far between. And, from what I have seen, obviously there's a couple game management mistakes, but that's baseball. That happens, right? You're going to be under a microscope when you get a job anyways, and some of that stuff is going to be under criticism, but it's the non-conference, right? I think, we can be a little bit more harsh evaluators when it gets into the SEC play and if there are some mistakes made, but I've been really, really impressed with what Matt Williams has been able to do with this pitching staff because, again, like I just mentioned, Tyler, this staff entered the season, inexperienced, and we weren't sure what we were going to get, and now it's one of the more consistent parts of this team, right? And, again, knock on wood that you don't have any injuries or anything like that, but this staff is prepared for it, even if it does happen, right? We saw it, too. Yep. With Becker and Kimball.
Absolutely. Well, intern Joe, enjoy the rest of your spring break. We'll work to get you back in here next week and get set for some SEC baseball against Ole Miss on the road next weekend.
Absolutely, Tyler. Appreciate it as always.
Yep. Intern Joe from Gamecock Central. That's it for hour number one. Hour number two, we'll dive into women's basketball as they get set for the SEC women's tournament that's coming up here on the Extra Point on the Game. Welcome back in. Hour number 2 of the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this very busy morning here on the game, getting you set for what's going to be a very busy weekend of Gamecock sports. That all kicks off in an hour and a half when pregame coverage starts on the Gamecocks radio network for women's basketball up the road in Greenville as they get set to take on Texas A&M in the quarterfinals of the SEC women's tournament. And once again, we are hoping that South Carolina once again breezes their way through these next couple days, walks away with another trophy, and gets set for the NCAA tournament coming up here very, very soon, where they will once again be a top seed and be expected to be in the mix for the national championship here in a couple of weeks' time. This is a team in South Carolina that has gone through a grind of a schedule. And look, the SEC is routinely one of the best conferences in all of women's basketball, and South Carolina, as always, is at the top of the list when it comes to that conference. But they've been through some challenges and some tests in their conference contest so far this season. You talk about the Tennessee games they played over the past couple weeks, namely the one on Sunday where Tennessee just would not go away and made things very interesting there in the late stages of that game. That big game on the road in Baton Rouge against LSU earlier on in the season, and how tough that was. And, as if the conference schedule itself was not difficult. And look, South Carolina did handle their business easily against several opponents, but, there were those tough games mixed in there in between. Carolina is a team that doesn't take days off. And they took the opportunity to play UConn once again in their non-conference slate in the middle of that SEC grind before playing that first game against Tennessee a couple weeks back. So this is a team that's been battle-tested and been going through the ringer of a lot of tough opponents through their schedule of conference play. So I'm very interested to see how this team responds to having a couple extra days off. To not having to deal with the grind that you've had to do for so much of this season with playing a game on Saturday, then playing a game on, Wednesday or Thursday night, playing a game on Sunday, then playing a game on Wednesday or Thursday night, playing another game on Sunday. Now you played your game on Sunday. You got all that out of the way. You had a couple extra days rest. The team was in attendance to watch the men play against Tennessee on Tuesday night, so they didn't even get up to Greenville, which, again, it's just a short little ride up the road anyway until yesterday. But having those couple extra days to refresh, rebound, get yourself locked in, and also having the benefit of having the double bye, having not played any games where Texas A&M had to play yesterday against Mississippi State, get refocused and get locked in for what is going to hopefully be another good weekend for South Carolina women's basketball. And, there is that added benefit of having Greenville right there in your backyard. And here's Coach Staley yesterday, cut number 13 from yesterday's list, Dave, talking about playing the tournament up in Greenville.
I'm going to try to not say how much it helps us to just be right up the street, because you'll have coaches not wanting the SEC tournament being in Greenville, but does it give us an advantage? Yes. But if it's in the Bahamas, our fans are coming. So, and then everybody else's fans. I mean, people are fans of the SEC tournament. Greenville being a city in which has exhibited it being a great spot for everyone, for the majority, I would say. The people that come there and visit and enjoy the games, they also enjoy a nightlife, they enjoy great scenery, they enjoy great restaurants. I mean, it's a great place to host an SEC tournament. I will say this: if we move, the ACC is going to come in and take over Greenville, and we don't want that to happen.
Dawn Staley doing her best to politic for the tournament to continue to be played in Greenville. And, there is something comforting about playing close to home, whether it's in your own arena or just up the road, an hour and a half roughly away up there in Greenville, of just being familiar with the area, being familiar with what's around, and allowing your fan base a very easy option to be able to travel up there. And trust me, there's going to be a lot of very passionate Gamecock fans, not only today, but through the rest of the weekend, assuming South Carolina wins today, up there cheering on this women's team as you would expect them to. But, as Dawn Staley mentioned there, even if this tournament was in the Bahamas, not only is the fan base going to be there and going to show up, this team is going to be a force to be reckoned with no matter where it's played at. When you look at the history of South Carolina in this tournament, won 7 out of the last 9. it is more of a surprise when South Carolina does not win the SEC women's tournament as opposed to when they do. And it is a part of the schedule that is almost become an expectation for this fan base. Like, oh yeah, of course South Carolina is going to at minimum be in the championship game for the SEC women's tournament. And when somebody beats them like Kentucky did a couple seasons ago before, they went en route to that national championship, it's a surprise. It's a shock. It's an upset that people talk about for a long time. And South Carolina did use that as their fuel and their motivation to run rampant through the NCAA tournament en route to that, national championship. But again, it's just something that South Carolina fans come to expect with this team, to just be in that game almost every single year. And there's no reason to think that this year is going to be any different. And this is just a really great tournament program. Dawn Staley is an amazing tournament coach, whether it be the SEC women's tournament or the NCAA women's tournament. She just knows how to handle things in a tournament environment. And there's something, that's going to get brought up in terms of this team and a lot of the young players that have not experienced the tournament type of atmosphere necessarily, to where, last season was a very veteran heavy team, to where maybe that wasn't something that people were bringing up. But I think there's enough veterans on this team, girls like Cardoso and so forth, that, can quickly bring the full Wileys and so forth up to speed on what to expect from a tournament type of atmosphere and a tournament type of environment, where I don't think that that's going to be an issue. One thing that is worth noting for South Carolina that is going to be very beneficial from a tournament standpoint is how deep their bench is. And when you talk about playing 3 games potentially over the course of 3 days, having that depth on your team is going to be of vital importance. Here's Dawn Staley the other day talking about the benefits of having that deep bench.
I think here it is. When you're able to win a national championship, you know why. When you haven't won one before, you're always clawing and scratching for what you think you need. But until you're able to do it, depth is way, 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 way important in making that run, making that track. Even an SEC tournament championship, it takes that in order for you to, especially the way we play, especially how much talent there is in our game. You're gonna have to have the rest to display the talent minute for minute. And if you have to play 35, 36, 38 minutes for 3 games, it's hard to win a championship that way.
It is absolutely hard to win a championship that way. And we've seen so many teams, that South Carolina's gone up against that don't have deep benches, that when you get into the late, minutes of the third and fourth quarter, it really starts to wear, because you have your starters out there still that have not gotten their adequate amount of rest. South Carolina is legitimately one of the best bench teams in the entire country, second only to Murray State in terms of overall bench points per game. And when you look at the girls that are coming off the bench as of right now, and it's changed a lot and mixed, in and out depending on, who's available. Cardoso sat out, and you move a girl like Watkins into that starting lineup. But Kitts, Watkins, Johnson, these are all starter caliber players that have started at points during the season, that are coming off your bench, giving you serious minutes. And that is one of many reasons why South Carolina thrives in these type of tournaments, because when you get to day number 3, when you're playing your third game and you have that deep bench that you can pull from, well, there's not going to be that much of a drop off in the caliber of the talent that you have on the floor. That's why you win. That's why you handle your business against tough teams in a conference like the SEC. So again, I look for that bench depth to be of vital importance to South Carolina this weekend as well. You get set to take on Texas A&M, a team that handled their business yesterday against Mississippi State to put themselves in this position. Joni Taylor is the coach of the Texas A&M Aggies. Here she is yesterday after that game against Mississippi State, talking about taking on the number 1 team in the country. Cut number 3, Dave.
Yeah, obviously they present huge challenges. Dawn's got a great team. I think we lacked aggression the last time we played them. We let them score in transition. We didn't rebound well. We had a really bad game, and South Carolina was the reason why. Let's give them full credit for that. They took us out of what we wanted to do. So we've got to stay composed. We've got to make sure we force them into the half court and not let them get out and score in transition, because they're very electric there. And then make sure we key in and be one and done. Their best shot is still their second and third shot. We've got to make sure we do a good job on the glass and limit them to one shot.
And this was a team that South Carolina played early on in the conference slate, won that game pretty handily, 99-64, all the way back in January. The score was 54-23 at halftime, so the game was pretty much over at that point in time. You look back at that box score, both Kitts and Cardoso had double-doubles in that game. Malaysia Fulwiley had 21 points off the bench, so typical numbers that you would expect out of South Carolina's, high-level contributors. And, it's interesting to look because both teams have changed a lot since then, and South Carolina has continued to get better and better and better. And this Texas A&M team has struggled quite a bit as of late down the stretch. So they're a team that is going to be in a little bit of desperation mode, knowing that the fate of their postseason definitely lies in the balance as they take on the number one team in the country. They're going to have to throw everything at it. And I'll be very interested to see, what kind of fight they're going to be able to put up against South Carolina. And when you look at, the end of their regular season, they lost 5 out of the last 6 games. So they kind of limped in to the SEC tournament. However, give them credit, they handled Mississippi State very easily, a team that they had lost to earlier on in the regular season, beating them 72-56 in their opening game yesterday in the SEC Women's Tournament. We'll dive into more of this, get some of the specifics of this matchup and everything else going on at the SEC Women's Tournament coming up in just a moment with our guy Elijah Campbell up there in Greenville. But I want to remind you once again, talking about baseball, and they're in action once again this weekend, taking on the Longwood Lancers, that you can go online to 1075thegame.com and enter for your chance to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Each game, $25 gets added to the pot. And when a Gamecock hitter hits a Grand Slam this season, you could win the cash prize of whatever's in the pot, currently $350 heading into tonight's game, taking on Longwood. So again, head on over to 1075thegame.com, enter for your chance to win each and every week the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. We'll get Elijah's thoughts and insight from everything going on at the SEC Women's Tournament, getting you set for today's matchup between the Gamecocks and the Aggies of Texas A&M, coming up right here on the Extra Point on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point here on The Game. Tyler Head along with you on this Friday morning. Again, a very, very busy weekend of Gamecock sports. Starting off with the women in action taking on Texas A&M. Coming up a little under 2 hours from now, it's time to head out to Greenville and bring in our guy, Elijah Campbell. But first, got to hit that intro, Dave. And as we bring Elijah in, again, a little under 2 hours away from tip time between South Carolina and Texas A&M. And Elijah, this was a game that we talked a little bit about yesterday before knowing who their opponent was, knowing it was going to be A&M, Mississippi State facing each other off in the 8-9 game. That A&M, who really came into the conference tournament reeling a little bit, having lost 5 out of their last 6 games, not only beat Mississippi State yesterday, but did so in convincing fashion, 72-56, and were a team that it was very much on the bubble coming into the tournament. That very much could provide a shot in the arm to a team that was struggling.
Oh, it absolutely could, especially for a team that not only has been struggling, but a team that offensively this year has been kind of inept. You look at their defense, and it's really impressive. I mean, their raw defensive rating is a little over 81.7, which is good for 25th in the country, according to College Basketball Reference. But the offensive rating ranks outside the top 115. And yesterday, they did what I expected them to do to Mississippi State on that end of the floor. But offensively was what really surprised me the most. I mean, they have 3 players that score about 12 points a game and do a whole bunch of the scoring, but Aisha Coulibaly broke out for 17 and had a third quarter that ultimately was the reason that there was that much separation in the fourth. I know Mississippi State hit, some garbage time late threes and jumpers to make the score look a little better than it was, but it was in the spirit of that game was a 20-point game, and it was a 20-point game because A&M got a lot going on the offensive side of the ball. A lot of the shots were falling. N.D. Rogers, who one of those 12-point-per-game scorers, came off the bench and was able to at least hit some outside shots and create some separation. They're going to need a lot of that if they want to even be in the same hemisphere as the South Carolina team today.
And again, this is a South Carolina team that beat them by over 30 points when they matched up all the way back in January, 99-64. It is important to note, though, that one of their key players from yesterday's game in Janiah Barker was not in that game against South Carolina. She ended up pulling down 15 points and 9 rebounds against Mississippi State yesterday. How big of a factor could she be today? Again, a girl that South Carolina's not seen this year, and maybe A&M making this game interesting.
Well, that's going to help the defense out a lot. If you remember that game at Reed Arena earlier in the season, South Carolina got up to a 21-3 lead, and when you get up to an advantage that's that big, you can kind of be in cruise control the rest of the game, and that's what South Carolina did. What Janiah Barker does a really good job of is adding an extra interior force. At 6'4", I mean, she's grabbing almost 8 rebounds a game. You're going to have to be able to create second chances against this South Carolina team if you want to be able to go toe-to-toe with the front court of Chloe Kitts and Camila Cardoso, or the combination of Ashlyn Watkins and Camila Cardoso, which defensively is a dangerous, dangerous lineup. You got to be able to have the bigs in there that can not only get rebounds, but be able to convert on the short opportunities that you get near the rim. One of the big differences in the game yesterday, too, between Mississippi State and A&M, Mississippi State was atrocious in the paint when it came to finishing the layup opportunities they were actually able to generate. A&M did a really good job of flushing those. And the thing about Janiah Barker that I liked yesterday, her and the combination of her and Aisha Coulibaly, even though Coulibaly is a guard, both of those girls finish around the rim really good. They have a great touch around the basket. They're not shooting it too hard. They're not going too fast off the backboard. They don't get sped up easily. They convert a lot of those short opportunities, and when you play a team that protects the rim like South Carolina does, you've got to be able to have that element of your game. And just having Janiah Barker back in the lineup for this game against South Carolina is going to give them more of a puncher's chance than it was a few months ago when they played at Reed Arena. Again, it's our guy Elijah Campbell up at the Bon Secours Wellness Arena up there in Greenville, getting you set
set for South Carolina and Texas A&M coming up today at noon. Pregame coverage starting at 11:30 right here on the game. I mentioned this was an A&M team that came in right there on the verge of the bubble. In fact, they were in the first team out category going into this weekend. They beat Mississippi State, who was a team that was in, according to the latest bracketology before yesterday. Is a win against Mississippi State and a loss to South Carolina enough to maybe get them in, or does this team need to make a run through the next couple days to be considered for the tournament?
They can't get blown out. They can't just get the brakes beaten off of them, and I think that's ultimately the big thing. I think the committee will take this every team's game against South Carolina with a grain of salt, with the understanding of this team blows everybody out. This Gamecock team has only had a handful of games this year decided by single digits. Right? Like it's good teams play South Carolina and lose by 20 plus. But what you can't do is just not have a pulse the entire game. You can't have what happened at Reed Arena earlier where South Carolina scores 21 of the first 24 points. You can't have a repeat of that. You have to show that you've at least improved and you have been able to share the floor with this team adequately. And I think that would go a long way if they're able to keep it even within like 10 points in the fourth quarter. And, that it's not completely decided with 7 or 8 minutes left. I think that context is something that the committee is going to look at, and I think yesterday beating Mississippi State kind of felt like an elimination game for those two teams, and I would not be surprised to see Mississippi State be excluded from the bracket field and Texas A&M included after yesterday.
Looking at things from a South Carolina perspective, not just for today's game against Texas A&M, but we assume South Carolina should be playing hopefully all the way through Sunday. I brought this point up earlier playing a cut from Dawn Staley. Bench points matter in an environment like this where you're potentially playing 3 games over the course of 3 days, and we've seen South Carolina, they have starter quality on their bench with girls like Kitts, Ashton Watkins, Johnson, just to name a few. That is what is going to be the biggest difference, in my opinion, in this tournament, where you can dig deep into that bench, not only in the late stages of a game like today, but let's say you get to Sunday, having played multiple games over the course of multiple days, having fresh starter caliber girls coming off the bench, giving you those points late in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the bench points, that is going to matter. And I was listening to your segment prior to this, and the emphasis on the bench is why this South Carolina team is just on a different stratosphere than anybody else. Like UConn has, I'll take UConn for example. Paige Beckers and Aaliyah Edwards is as good of a 1-2 combination as you're going to see in this entire sport. But the reason that UConn and South Carolina was a 20-plus point game, and really the spirit of that game was more. It was almost like a 30-point game in terms of what it felt like on the floor. It's that they don't have a reliable 4, 5, 6 player, that type of rotation. The back end of their starting lineup isn't as good as maybe some of the other really good teams in college basketball, like your Ohio States, your Indianas, even Iowa to a degree. But what South Carolina being able to dip into that bench and go 9, 10 deep is a luxury that not only do teams in women's college basketball don't have, and college basketball teams do not have that type of luxury. And that's the ultimate separator, right? Like, you can be talented, you can be able to hang with a team for 25, 35 minutes, but ultimately those legs get tired, and in these tournament settings, those legs are going to get tired. This allows the Gamecocks to just have that extra gear that no other team is going to be able to match.
And again, South Carolina starting things off today with Texas A&M, that being game number 1 for your Friday slate. You have coming up a little bit later on in the day in the games following Tennessee and Alabama, then Auburn and LSU, and Florida and Ole Miss wrapping up the day coming up tonight at 8:30. You'll be able to see that on the SEC Network. A&M and Florida are the only 2 lower seeds to win games so far in this tournament, including a wildly entertaining game last night where Vanderbilt almost came back and won against Florida in the late game there. Has there been anything that surprised you through these first couple days of games so far up there in Greenville?
I would say that the Florida women have really surprised here in these last couple days, just because a little bit surprised on how they were able to maintain a lead like they did until the end, where Vanderbilt got in there, but also a little disappointment in Vanderbilt. Ralph Shea and the Commodores, I thought, had a fantastic season. I thought they played South Carolina really well when they came up here to Columbia to play. If Dawn Staley wasn't, the high mark of the sport, then Shea Ralph would have a legitimate argument for SEC Coach of the Year because of the job that she did with them. But for Florida to be able to go back-to-back in that 11-14 game and survive. They survived that game too. Missouri at 2-14 in the conference gave the Gators all they could handle. And I looked at Florida after that game and it was like, you probably should have won that Missouri game by more, even though Missouri was a desperate team. They turned around and played a really, really good Vanderbilt team who was given a lot of teams struggles this year, especially on the defensive side of the floor, and went toe-to-toe, led for most of the game, and ended up winning. And that was a surprise. Do I think they can replicate that against Ole Miss? Absolutely. Ole Miss has shown a tendency this year to drop some games to teams they shouldn't. So if you're looking for a Cinderella team, I know at the first day of the tournament I liked Georgia because of the Javon Nicholson element to it and having a go-to scorer that's very reliable. But this Florida team just discovered here recently that with Elijah Matheru, that they also have a reliable go-to scorer who can get you over 30-plus and average 18 a game. So I think that is kind of your mini Cinderella here in this SEC tournament so far. And who knows? I think they'll give Ole Miss a really, really good game. That'll be a fun one to watch.
We'll certainly see how it plays out over the course of the weekend. About an hour until airtime on the Gamecocks Radio Network with our guy, Brad Muller. We'll let you go. We'll let you get settled in. We'll be checking in with you throughout the weekend.
That sounds like a plan. I'll see you here soon.
Again, that's our guy Elijah Campbell up there in Greenville for the SEC Women's Tournament. Quick programming note that's just coming in a few minutes ago. Today's baseball game against Longwood, because of some impending weather, has been moved up an hour earlier. The start time was originally set for 7 o'clock. Now is 6 o'clock start time. Pre-game coverage will start here on the game at 5:45. So quick programming note on that, again, for the baseball game coming up today against Longwood. We'll dive into some more men's basketball coming up next. Paul Jones of On 3 from Mississippi State going to join me on the other side, giving us a glimpse of the Bulldogs ahead of tomorrow's contest up next on the Extra Point here on the game. Oh, so many great ways you can watch and listen to us here on the game. You can tune in traditionally on radio, 107.5 The Game here in Columbia, 100.3 The Game out in Myrtle Beach, 100.5 The Game out in Florence. You can watch us on The Game TV, sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass. All you got to do is go to youtube.com, search The Game TV, click on us, watch us live from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. each and every weekday. Go ahead and subscribe to us as well while you're over there. And hit that bell icon to stay notified anytime we are live streaming, as we do each and every weekday. You can also tune in on the 107.5 The Game app as well. Just go to your respective app store, Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and download the app. Listen to us wherever you go, across the state, across the country, across the world. Take the game with you wherever you go. Again, the 107.5 The Game app and The Game TV, sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass. Welcome back into the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Friday morning, getting you set for a full weekend. That includes men's basketball wrapping up its regular season on the road tomorrow afternoon at Mississippi State in Starkville. Pregame coverage starting at 2 o'clock for a 2:30 tip right here on the game. We now welcome in from Maroon and White Daily, Paul Jones, who covers the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Paul, first of all, thanks so much for taking a little bit of your time this morning. These are two teams that saw each other to start off conference play all the way back in early January. South Carolina picked up the 68-62 victory in a tough defensive grind-it-out type of game. What is different about this Mississippi State team from the one that South Carolina saw all those months back?
Yeah, it's kind of weird that they started the season and finished the season up in the SEC. It's been an interesting time for Mississippi State since then. Obviously, they have faced a heck of a schedule and a huge gauntlet in the SEC this year. Probably the toughest SEC schedule I've ever seen Mississippi State play. Back then, when you look at that game, I think it was Tolu Smith's second game back. He missed all but one non-conference game. Keyshawn Murphy had left the team not long after that South Carolina game. He did play in that game, but he left the team for a few weeks, and then he returned, and he's been for about, I think, 4 weeks now. Josh Hubbard is starting now. He wasn't starting back then. So there's been several tweaks and changes to the starting lineup and some to the rotation, but obviously South Carolina is definitely improved since that game too. I think they're a different team, and I think both teams are different from that first game. And like I said, Mississippi State this year, they called it from the SEC schedule makers. They had to play Auburn, Alabama, Kentucky, and South Carolina twice, plus their rival Ole Miss twice. So it's been an interesting year for sure.
And Mississippi State comes into this game on a bit of a skid, having lost their last three. And the last two games in particular against Auburn and Texas A&M, they've gotten off to very, very slow starts, which were key factors in not being able to win those games. What's been the issue with this team as of late not being able to come out of the gate on fire?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with who they've been playing. And then just a lot of fluke things happen at Texas A&M. I think they're the league's worst three-point shooting team, and they happen to make 7 of 10 threes in the first half. And, Mississippi State playing bad on the road has kind of been a theme this year. Their only 2 road wins have been at LSU and Missouri, and they won both of those handily. But it's been a struggle on the road. And, of course, again, you look at some of their road losses are South Carolina, Kentucky, Auburn, Alabama. Ole Miss it's been a brutal road schedule as well. Florida's in there as well. But I think the slow starts have it's kind of hard to pinpoint it. Obviously, it's been on the offensive end more than anything. When you look at having struggles getting Tolu Smith going early like he likes to go, I think that's been an issue. And it just, I guess, I wouldn't call it bad shooting or bad shot selection, just more of a lack of an offensive rhythm that's played a big role in those slow starts.
You mentioned somebody a moment ago that came off the bench in that first game against South Carolina in Josh Hubbard, and I would equate, the kind of season that he's had similar to what Colin Murray-Boyles has had here at South Carolina, 2 guys that have just exploded as conference play has gone along, and Josh Hubbard is now one of the best guys on that Mississippi State team. How would you summarize the rise of him this season, particularly through conference play?
It's been a fun year to watch freshmen in this SEC, and it's going to be fun to watch. I know some of them will go pro early, but I think some of these guys will be around for 2 or 3 years, and it's going to be fun to watch them grow and mature. Josh it's been interesting to watch his game develop. In high school, he was the leading all-time scorer in the state of Mississippi, so he's always been a good shooter and more or less a volume shooter too. I think he took 15 threes in the A&M loss, so he's going to get shots up, but I think Josh has made strides on the defensive end. Obviously, his height affects him on defense, and it makes it tough for him at times. But I think he's really done a good job of guarding the ball and staying in front of the ball more than he did early in the SEC season. But just a humble guy that plays within the offense. Obviously, you want your best shooter shooting more than anybody else, and It's played out that way for him, but he also plays within the offensive system, and I think that's been interesting to watch how he has molded his game to within James' offense.
Again, talking to Paul Jones from Maroon and White Daily, going back to that first game, and we know this to be the identity of a Chris Jans coach team, more defensive-minded, more of that grinded outside, which South Carolina plays in that similar vein. What is the comfort level for Mississippi State playing against a team that plays a similar type of basketball to them?
I think it's a good matchup. I think both teams would probably say that because they're similar. Mississippi State's had some bad matchups lately, and I think A&M was a bad match for them, especially with what A&M does defensively with their zone and the way they mix up defenses. But obviously the records are different, a little bit different when you look at South Carolina, Mississippi State. But I think it's very two similar teams that play similar ways, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out Saturday.
Last one for you here. Latest bracketology that came out earlier this morning had Mississippi State as a number 10 projected seed. And Chris Jans talked in his presser the other day after A&M about kind of the uncertainty of where this team sits as of right now. Obviously, beating South Carolina would be a big deal, and wanting to go into the SEC tournament, probably picking up a couple wins. What, in your opinion, is the blueprint for this team to lock itself into the NCAA tournament?
Well, I think it's been the same situation it's been for a week or 2 weeks now. And, they had that 5-game winning streak, and at that point it needed just one more win. Obviously, they had a chance against Kentucky, and then they lost that one at the buzzer, and they lost to Auburn and Texas A&M. I think one more win locks them up with a tournament bid. And you obviously don't want to go in the SEC tournament on a 4-game losing streak, but if they were to lose Saturday, I still think the same remains. I think they just need one more win, whether it be Saturday or the SEC tournament. So they'll have to find a way to get that one more win, and I think that will lock them in. Now, if you lose Saturday and lose your first game in the SEC tournament, I think you're playing with fire then, and you'll have to sweat it out on Selection Sunday.
Well, this game is going to be very important for both teams coming up tomorrow. Paul, thanks so much for taking a little bit of your time, and appreciate your insight into Mississippi State.
Anytime.
All right, again, that's Paul Jones from Maroon and White Daily. Again, that game tomorrow between South Carolina and the Bulldogs of Mississippi State, tipping off at 2:30. Pre-game coverage starting right here on at 2 o'clock, right here on 107.5 The Game. As we head into this break, I want to remind you once again that tonight's baseball game against Longwood has been moved up an hour early. Originally a 7 o'clock start time, now going to start at 6 o'clock. Pre-game coverage will be starting at 5:45. All of that right here on The Game, as there is some weather that is going to be coming into the area this upcoming weekend. Speaking of baseball, I've been informed by our guy, Josh upstairs, we have more tickets. 2 pairs of tickets, by the way. Callers number 3 and 4 right now. 2 pairs of tickets, 1 each, for tomorrow's game against Longwood with 4 o'clock first pitch. Callers number 3 and 4 right now, 803-404-6100. Win yourself a pair of tickets to tomorrow's game against Longwood, the middle game of the 3-game set. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point coming up next here on The Game.
was going to rip his heart out. I'm the best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me. Lennox is a conqueror. No, I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody as ruthless. I'm Sonny Liston. I'm Jack Dempsey. There's no one like me. I'm from Nairclaw. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable. And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children.
Welcome back into the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. A couple more minutes to go here before we jump in to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. I couldn't ignore this story because it's just too good. That, of course, was Mike Tyson back in his day with his infamous Eat Your Children promo, I guess is the wrestling terminology to use for something like that. But the baddest man on the planet, somebody that you did not want to step into the boxing ring with, certainly back in the day. Dave, I got to ask, do you know who Jake Paul is? Are you aware of who he is?
Only because of this.
Okay, well, so you don't know anything else about him?
That's all I know.
He is an internet celebrity, got popular on YouTube, has made a lot of money, and does all kinds of outlandish things. He's not very well liked by a lot of people because he's gotten in his fair share of controversies, but he's also a boxer. He's had 10 fights up to this point. I believe he's 9-1 with 6 wins by knockout and 3 wins by decision. I don't care how good of a boxer you are, and I don't care how old Mike Tyson is. I would not step in the ring with him. He's 57. Jake Paul's 27. But even 57-year-old Mike Tyson would scare me enough to not want to do this.
Yeah, he could bite your ear off, maybe your arm.
Maybe.
Who knows? You know, and yeah, he's a mean man.
Now, I don't think he's under the influence like maybe he was back in the day with some of his fights, to where some of his antics were maybe a little bit over the top. I think he's mellowed out a little bit, but I've seen videos of him hitting bags and doing footwork and stuff like that. He's still got it. Maybe he's not as fast as he once was, but I think he could still hurt you if he really wanted to.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he won this.
So Mike Tyson and Jake Paul getting set to face off July 20th. And here's an interesting note. This is going to be streamed on Netflix. Netflix has, up to this point, traditionally been movies, TV shows, that kind of stuff. They've never really delved into live entertainment, at least not to my knowledge up to this point. It is interesting to note that starting next year, they're going to start broadcasting Monday Night Raw, WWE wrestling, on Monday nights as part of live television. But to my knowledge, this is kind of the first foray into it with this bout between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. And that in and of itself kind of opens up a whole new possibility of what television could be if Netflix starts getting in on live entertainment and sports.
Why not? I would. And, you know, why not?
Well, the unfortunate thing is if you want to watch this, you're not going to be able to share a password with somebody to get it like you used to be able to, because they've since cracked down on that.
Yeah, I have like 3 nieces and a nephew, and they all had the password, you know?
Yeah.
And they would, and then I forget how much I was paying for it, and then it like went up all of a sudden, and then they said, you have a householder who is in Montana,
yep,
and you're not in Montana. So
yeah, it's one of those things now you have to set like the home base for your Netflix, and we're like, within your home on your Wi-Fi, you can use it on TV, your laptop, phone, whatever it may be. But yeah, once you venture out away from that home, like it's not the same, unfortunately. So they've cracked down. So if you want to watch Jake Paul and Mike Tyson fight, you might have to fork over. I don't even know how much Netflix is now. It's like $20 a month.
$26.99.
Oh my goodness, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and
it used to be $9.99.
Yeah, yeah. I think. But you know, my nieces and nephews, I'm like, you're in your 30s.
Sure.
Buy your own. You're grown up now.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, and that's it. Like, I don't even use Netflix all that often. I had, like, my parents have it, and I had it on my, like, TV, and if I wanted to watch something, I would. But, like, I don't use it enough to justify paying however much a month it is for the, you know, baseline thing. I'm certainly not going to pay $26. Like, that's half of a cable bill.
Cable? You have cable?
Well, my apartment complex, it's built into the rent. So we get like cable whether we want it or not. So it's, you know, I have it because of that. If that wasn't baked in, I wouldn't have it. I used to do like YouTube TV and Hulu and all that kind of stuff as my streaming television. But yeah, it's only because of my apartment complex bakes it in.
Yeah. Did you know, not that you care, but I was one of the first 200 subscribers to Sling TV.
How did you pull that off?
I don't know. I just like heard about it. And
Was
I'm
it like, were you like in the beta or something?
Yeah, I did all that. And so I still get a $5 a month discount.
Oh, wow. That's really awesome. I did Sling TV for a while. It was good. But again, it was one of the first ones that came along, and then there was like 20 other options. So I kind of explored some other ones, and Sling didn't quite have the TV channels that I was looking for, but it's a good product. I mean, there's a million options out there, and I guess this means Netflix is probably going to be the next one, to where they're going to have something where you can get your sports channels or your local channels or whatever it may be for, I don't know, $40-$50 a month, like all these others.
Oh, well, Sling, I have to tell you that Sling now has like Cambodian sports.
Oh,
it has
what's a Cambodian sport?
I have no idea, but it has so many things now.
Yeah,
I can't keep up with it. What is this? They just add stuff all the time.
Well, I feel like a lot of those are filler channels to make you feel like you have more. Like, oh, you get 350 channels. It's like, well, I don't want to watch, Cambodian log rolling. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
But yeah, changing world of television, and I don't know. We'll see if Mike Tyson still got it, fighting Jake Paul on July the 20th. Streaming on Netflix, something to look forward to this upcoming
I'm sure
summer.
You're too young. You didn't have the Mike Tyson video game, did you?
I'm familiar with it, Punch Out. But yeah, that was a little before my time. I know Glass Joe was 1 in 99.
Yeah, and Tomato Can, somebody?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And that'll do it for today's edition of the Extra Point. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you here on The Game, leading you up pregame coverage of Gamecock women's basketball. All right. Chris, can you hear me? All right, cool. We're going to bring in here. All you got to do, Dave, is just pot him up on the internet PC. He's not going to be able to hear the commercials. So it should be fine. So, yeah, just pot him up, and we'll be good to go. All right, Chris, coming in just a second here. 11 o'clock on your Friday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Westminster, and Chris Clark along with you here in the Herndon Chevrolet Studios. Guys, it is a very, very busy weekend of Gamecock sports. We have an abbreviated show today because we're going to be leading right into pregame coverage of the Gamecock women taking on Texas A&M. Tip-offs is top of the hour. Going to have pregame coverage starting at 11:30 here on the game. And hopefully by Monday morning, we're talking about yet another SEC Women's Tournament crown for this team.
Yeah, man, it happens quick. The tournament flies right by, especially when you are just getting double buys every single year. It seems like for South Carolina women's basketball. So win a few games and you can take home some more hardware, which I think certainly you would consider them the heavy, heavy favorite. Won't ever be easy in this conference, but I would think, man, they'll take care of A&M pretty handily today. We'll see what happens as this thing gets deeper. LSU probably the one other team in this field that I think can give you trouble, but certainly they're going right down the road. South Carolina is. Greenville be a great home court advantage, even though it's technically a neutral site. And man, I'm loving this though. We're going to lead right into it, Tyler. This is like on a Friday when your teacher wheels in the TV that's like attached to the cart.
Right.
Easy day for us.
Oh, absolutely. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I was just looking back, guys. I totally agree with you, Wes. I think my daughter actually has a movie day today, and I don't. You know what? The funny thing is they actually apparently still have the rolling cart, which shocked me. I mean, I figured the rolling cart had been thoroughly done away with by now, but it does still exist for some reason or another.
I figured every classroom would have those giant smart boards that they were.
Yeah, I think they have both, but believe it or not, the rolling cart has survived.
Got to go down to the AV room and get the one that's strapped to the rolling cart.
Sometimes some of them don't, like the VCR isn't working right or whatever. So, but I was looking back. I do remember, guys, the first time that South Carolina played A&M this season. Obviously, they played in the regular season, and at that time, A&M I think was 2-3 in the conference, but they were 14-4 overall. And I do remember hearing at that time, hey, this is a pretty tough defensive team. Like they can limit opponents. They'd done some good things defensively up to that point. Well, what does South Carolina do? Scores 99 points. I guess they declined the option to score 100 like they do a lot of times. Ended up winning that game 99-64. They were up 25-8, after the first quarter. So just never really in doubt. And that was Malaysia Fulwiley scoring her career high 21 points. So yeah, certainly South Carolina has done incredibly well at this tournament. They've obviously done extremely well in the conference just in general. But you remember, guys, probably, a week or two ago when they were playing a game on the broadcast and they put up the SEC tournament, champions for women's basketball in the conference over the last several years. And it was just South Carolina, except for that 1 year Kentucky got them, and it was just the Gamecocks. So they'll definitely be, the favorite. They'll definitely be the hunted going into this tournament. But you certainly do have to like their chances based on, what they've done so far this year.
Even that Kentucky game, like kind of for some reason, I still have memories of that game. And if I remember correctly, it was South Carolina was kind of in control, and it was just one of those games that kind of got away from you at the end, and some things went wrong. Games tend to kind of, the score contracts at the end of basketball games, it feels like, and I think South Carolina maybe was not hitting some free throws, and Kentucky just hit some big shots. And I remember even losing that game was very shocking, even with like in the confines of how the game played out, not just the big picture that South Carolina was clearly the better team. And you know, I think for South Carolina, we had this discussion before. Like, is it, at least during the regular season, is there something to be gained from potentially losing a game and kind of making that reset you a little bit, especially with a young team? And maybe you can make that argument. I didn't make the argument during the regular season either, but I could see that side. But I feel like once you get into tournament time and you're playing with a little bit more pressure and you have hardware on the line, to me that's completely out the window, and you're playing for something that very few teams, and certainly no team in South Carolina history, has ever done, and that is to be perfect, to have an entire season without a blemish. And to me that is special. So I think you want to win every game from this point forward since you've gotten to this point.
Absolutely, and I think the conversation definitely shifts. You know, we talked about that in the regular season, saying, hey, if you dropped a game to Tennessee or you dropped a game to LSU, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, and maybe it's your chance to kind of reset, refocus, and lock in for the stretch run to close out the season. But yeah, when you wrap up your second straight perfect regular season, again, for a team that nobody expected that to do that this year because there was so much turnover from last year's team, now that you've accomplished that, you got the chance to go out and win more hardware this weekend if you win 3 games and ride a wave of momentum going into the NCAA tournament coming up here, where you're going to be once again favored as the team to take home it all at the end when it's all said and done in about a month's time. Like, yeah, there's no reason to think that this team isn't going to run through this tournament this weekend once again.
Yeah, I like the point that you made, Wes, because I do think sometimes with teams losing a game at a time where it's okay to lose, you know? So it's okay to lose a regular season game if it's not going to be consequential to your chances of winning the league, or if you're playing in the SEC tournament, or obviously if you're playing in the NCAA tournament, you know, losing a game is not an option then if your goal is to ultimately go on and win the thing, to win the tournament. And I think there is a case to be made that sometimes that can be a reset. But I think 2 things. Number one, you are chasing history. You know, this is a team that you not only want to go win, you've won the SEC, you want to go win the tournament, you want to go win the national championship, especially right after last season. Tahina Palpa, who wasn't even on this team, has spoken in the past about how she basically took that personally. You know, while she was still, I'm an Oregon basketball player, I took personally how Iowa treated South Carolina in the Final Four and that they lost that basketball game, and I'm going to come and turn it around, right? So I think you've got that historical aspect in front of you, right? And you've already accomplished a piece of it because you've gone undefeated in the regular season back-to-back, which hadn't been done here. So you've got that. You want to go finish out strong, go undefeated, go win your conference tournament, go win the national championship. But I also think, you know, there's probably a strong case to be made that this team has already had some wake-up calls, and I think they've been able to accomplish that without actually losing a game. We saw a bad Georgia team come to Colonial Life Arena, and South Carolina, frankly, for a good portion of that game, kind of scuffled, kind of struggled a little bit. Tennessee, which is not a bad basketball team, gave South Carolina a heck of a game the other day in the clincher. So there have been a few instances where, whether it's good teams, LSU, really good team, Tennessee, pretty good team, or even teams that are not that great, you know, have had some success in spots against South Carolina, but they're so good they've been able to rebound and not lose the game, but still improve and I think still have some eye-opening portions of the season that have helped them grow without losing.
I think it's fascinating looking back at this list of tournament champions and how the progress of the South Carolina program to the extent of where they are now, and even kind of when they were getting slightly before where they're at right now, completely stopping Tennessee in its tracks. And kind of, you can almost, if you look back at this, it is almost like a historic record of the passing of the baton, because you go all the way back to 1980, and Tennessee is all over this thing. They still have the record 17 SEC tournament championships in women's basketball. But from the moment, so in 2014, South Carolina actually took over regular season. They won the regular season championship. Tennessee answered by winning the tournament championship. 2015, South Carolina and Tennessee won the regular season championship, so they had the same record. Well, 2015 SEC tournament, South Carolina wins it and just never looks back. You have, in order, starting 2015, South Carolina, South Carolina, South Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi State in 2019, then South Carolina, 2020, 2021, and then Kentucky stole it in 2022, and then South Carolina wins it last year in 2023. If South Carolina wins it this year, this will be their 8th SEC tournament championship, and they are second all time. Obviously, it's going to take it's going to take a lot. It's take a decade to potentially pass Tennessee, but still.
And that'd be their 8th tournament championship in the past 10 years. You mentioned Mississippi State and Kentucky, the only two that have gotten it in the past decade. And look, we don't know how long Dawn Staley plans on coaching, but if she's around for another 10 to 15 years, and they certainly could make a run at that number. But, nevertheless, should be a good weekend for the Gamecocks. And again, starting off with Texas A&M in a little under an hour's time for what can hopefully be a comfortable win today, and 2 more good wins this come as the weekend rolls along.
I start looking at the upside of Dawn Staley's career, and this is kind of zooming out. But Wes, you got me thinking, or Tyler, both of y'all. You mentioned, Tyler, if Dawn stays 10 more years. Wes, talking about the possibility. Can you catch Tennessee? Because they are still, even with what South Carolina's done, this extreme dominance. They're still a ways away from that. But it kind of puts into perspective. Gino Auriemma has won 11 national titles. That's insane, right? And you kind of wonder, will Dawn move on to something one day? She's been a pioneer, so one day is she going to be like, I want to coach in the WNBA, or I want to coach in the NBA? We've seen that, right? We've seen Becky Hammon, right? The crossover. Do we see something like that at some point from her? If she stays here, though, and she seems happy, and they seem happy to have her for good reason, what all can she accomplish? It's pretty crazy to think about, I think.
Yeah, I feel like, outside of maybe getting the opportunity to coach a men's program in college basketball, I feel like she's most likely going to want to stay here for a while and continue to add to this legacy that she's already crafted a Hall of Fame career at this point, and can continue to add to that and be remembered as one of the, one of the all-time greats, and just being able to add another feather to her cap this weekend, hopefully with another SEC tournament crown.
Well, it doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon, right? You have now this young core, and I think the rest of the college basketball world was probably hoping the freshies are gone.
Sure.
South Carolina is going to take a step back. Yeah, they've recruited well, but have, number 1 overall pick, right? They lose Aaliyah Boston, and they lose everybody that meant so much during that stretch. Well, guess what? They're just as good, probably better.
Right.
And Te-Hina Paopao is coming back as well. So you potentially bring back just about everybody from this team except for a couple of seniors. You get Paopao back, and then you're bringing in number 2 player in the country, Joyce Edwards, Sarah Strong, who is the number 1 prospect according to some people, top 5 prospect. She's heavily considering South Carolina. So you've done all the legwork to get where you are right now. Really, it's completely up to Dawn Staley how long she wants to stay there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll continue getting you set for today's game between the Gamecocks and the Aggies as the abbreviated Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls along here on Friday on The Game.
Just throws the timing off.
Firehouse Subs here.
All right, guys and girls, this episode of the Gamecock Central Takeover and every single episode brought to you by our friends at Firehouse Subs. Head online right now, firehousesubs.com, or do what I do and download the Firehouse Subs app. 14 convenient locations throughout the Midlands, so really wherever you are when you're about to order your lunch, maybe in a few minutes, wherever you are, there is a Firehouse Subs pretty close to you. We can guarantee that. Again, the best way to order is to use the Rapid Rescue to go. Avoid the wait. Order online. You can do that at firehousesubs.com or with the Firehouse Subs app. And guess what? I know there's a lot of big basketball games up soon. You can even order catering on the Firehouse Subs app. If you go to Firehouse Subs app, look right at the bottom of your screen, hit catering order. It'll pop up a way that you can order catering as well. Again, Firehouse Subs, firehousesubs.com, Firehouse Subs app. Order the Rapid Rescue to go right now and get your lunch from our friends at Firehouse Subs.
Next integrated, is that you? Yeah. Are you integrated? Yeah, I'll have to give you a 10-second thing. Okay. I'm creating time. Your hard timeout is 24:10. I don't know if you can. Well, that's not your time to be out. That's sort of, that's when you'll do your 1 minute.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you for a few more minutes, taking you right into pregame coverage on the Gamecocks Radio Network with our guy Brad Muller, leading you up to a 12 o'clock tip-off between South Carolina and the Texas A&M Aggies. Aggies picking up the pretty decisive victory yesterday over Mississippi State to get themselves in this position in the quarterfinals of the SEC tournament. When you look at keys to the game, and look, everything's heavily tilted in the favor of South Carolina, but not only for this game today, and we're assuming they're going to be able to make their way through the weekend, bench play is going to come into play. South Carolina is the second best team in the entire nation behind Murray State in total number of bench points per game. When you look at Kitts, when you look at Watkins, look at Raven Johnson, these girls that are starter calibers that have been coming off the bench as of late, that is what's going to be the difference, in my opinion, between South Carolina and a lot of these teams are going to see this weekend.
Well, guys, I'll lean on Markeisha Grant here, former Gamecock, who's actually writing for us this postseason on Gamecock Central. The key for South Carolina really all season long, other than just the fact they're just talented as all heck, has been, yes, they're flashy, they can shoot, they can score. This team probably more so than last year's team, but they still play team defense, and they have more depth than anybody in the country. So when you get in a tournament situation, you kind of, and not that it's a long tournament for South Carolina because it's a double bye, but when you're going to play multiple games in a row like that you will in the SEC tournament, their depth is going to shine even more so, whereas the teams you're playing right now, yes, they might be a little bit more locked in because they haven't had time off, but their legs maybe start to lose them the deeper you get into this tournament. So that sets up very, very well for South Carolina, and that depth, it kind of gives you an out in that maybe a couple of girls have an off day.
Sure.
Go to the next person, right? And we've seen that from South Carolina this year. Somebody not quite up to par for what they're usually doing, go to the next person, and they can step up and take over.
Yeah, and I'll lean on our other fantastic writer, Chris Wellbaum. Reading what he wrote about Dawn Staley's comments on Gamecock Central, she was talking about practice and how energetic it was, but also spoke to depth. So obviously, when you're as deep as South Carolina is, and this has been kind of a theme of Dawn Staley teams. They've had depth, and it seems like, gosh, I don't know, guys, this seems like the most depth they've had in a while, even for her teams. Maybe it's a little recency bias, prisoner of the moment, but it certainly seems like their depth just absolutely comes at you in waves. That's important to win any basketball game, right? It helps you a lot. But Dawn Staley pointed out, hey, you're in a tournament setting now, and so depth is what she went Shane Beamer on it, way more important, in making a tournament run. And Wellbaum pointed out, Wes, you were talking about when Kentucky beat South Carolina in what was that, 2022? The starters for South Carolina had logged really heavy minutes in the first couple games. And by the time that title game rolled around, they looked a little fatigued, right? And so South Carolina, we know it this season, Dawn has talked about it, has looked a little fatigued, even with the depth they have. It's just been a long season. It's not easy to win every single basketball game you play. And so they do have a lot of depth that helps them. But I think that's why it makes it so much more important. Can you kind of dispatch Texas A&M early? Can you rotate a lot of players in and out of the game? Can you have this game almost effectively over at halftime like it was last time against the same team? And that way you can rest your starters. I think when you're trying to make a tournament run and win a championship in a short time window, that becomes more and more critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting off to a fast start is going to be key. I believe it was the 21-3 start up there when they played A&M back in January and had a huge lead going into the half of that game. So it was kind of cruise control in the second half. And again, as you brought up, Chris, there would be huge in maybe getting some rest for the starters today as well.
Yeah, excited to see what happens, guys. Obviously, South Carolina is used to this, but relatively new team, so this is going to be a new experience for some of these girls as well.
Absolutely. I expect we hear a lot of Sandstorm playing this weekend as well. Chris, any final thoughts?
Yeah, probably a lot of Sandstorm, guys. I mean, again, I'll go back to it earlier. The Gamecocks are the favorite, but, look back at 2022. You never know. That Kentucky team, they got hot. South Carolina was a little off kilter in that title game, ended up losing. You have some other good and capable, like you said, Wes, LSU they're.
That's right. Coming up next, it's pregame coverage. Brad Muller on the call on the Gamecocks Radio Network. This has been the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs.
Okay, get ready. I'll tell you when to go. Okay, you can go.
The tournament, you're probably about to head over to your TV, whether you're at work, whether you're at home. You want to make sure you have an outstanding audio-visual setup. And so if you do get to go home to check out the tournament or any of the big games that are going on, March, of course, right here, so that means some madness about to take place. You want to make sure your audio-visual setup is in tip-top shape. Our friends at Integrated Media, Michael and Nathan, they can help you do that. They can do everything from picking out the equipment for you. You don't have to go to the big box stores. They can source it for you. They can make sure you have the best possible equipment, Sonos wireless speakers, flat screen televisions, and a strong internet signal for streaming to make sure that you don't miss any of the action. 15. Go check out their website, integratedmediainc.com or 803-948-8327. Again, that's our friends Michael and Nathan at Integrated Media, integratedmediainc.com.
Thank you, man.
Cox. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bon Secours Wellness Arena in Greenville, South Carolina, site of the 2024 Southeastern Conference Tournament. The SEC regular season champions South Carolina Gamecocks will take on Texas A&M in the quarterfinal round of the tournament. It's day one for the Gamecocks, but day three of the tournament, as of course the regular season champs get the double bye. As you can tell by the eruption of applause, the Gamecocks have now taken the floor for the pregame warm-ups here in Greenville. Gamecocks have won this tournament 7 of the last 9 years, and they've been to the championship game 8 times in that span, and they're hoping to get a little more of that here this year, but it'll have to be 3 games in 3 days as usual. The Gamecocks at 29-0 overall, 16-0 in the SEC, their second straight perfect regular season, but none of that matters now. 1 loss, and you go home. Let's see how the Gamecocks can handle that as we check the Prisma Health injury report. Injury report brought to you by Prisma Health as the official team physicians. Prisma Health provides the orthopedic and sports medicine care to keep the Gamecocks in the game. Prisma Health is proud to be the official healthcare system and team physicians of the Gamecocks. No injuries to report. That's the way we like it. Let's hope it stays that way the rest of the year. Looking ahead to Texas A&M, they were the number 9 seed in this tournament, and they picked up a big win in yesterday's second round, because this tournament started on Wednesday. We'll go through the whole bracket in a little bit, but as the 9 seed, they knocked off the number 8 seed Mississippi State 72-56 to improve to 19-11 overall. They went 6-10 in the SEC during the regular season. They're under the direction of second-year head coach Joni Taylor, her second year at Texas A&M, I should say, 9th as a head coach. Most fans will remember she spent 7 years as the head coach at Georgia before heading over to College Station. She was the 2021 SEC Coach of the Year and has really turned the Aggies around after going 9-20 last year and finishing tied for 13th at 2-14 in the league, 19-11 this year, and playing much better basketball here as they are finally healthy. They had lost a couple of key starters at different points during the season, but they have got their full lineup here for the tournament, and that certainly helped them yesterday to knock off Mississippi State, who drops to 21-11 on the season. And Mississippi State, one of those bubble teams heading into the SEC tournament. And for their sake, you hope they didn't play themselves out of it. Texas A&M perhaps trying to play themselves in to the NCAA tournament, and obviously a huge feather in their cap if they could get the win here against the Gamecocks and get to 20 wins. But they should be at full strength, and they've got 4 players at least to be concerned about, as they, like the Gamecocks, they have some balanced scoring with a couple of good guards led by Aisha Coulibaly, the senior from Mali, who spent 3 years at Auburn. In her first year at Texas A&M, was a second-team All-SEC selection the last couple of years. 12.6 points, 5.6 rebounds, 5th in the league in steals, coming off a 17-point performance in their win here yesterday. Another guard to keep an eye on is India Rogers, who's back healthy now. Rogers had spent a couple of years at Southern Cal, 2 at Oregon. She was a 3-time All-Pac-12 selection, averaging just under 13 points per game, in the top 10 in the SEC in both assists and 3-pointers made. She had 12 against Mississippi State yesterday. Had a big game during the regular season matchup with the Gamecocks. Rogers had 21 points, one of her 2 20-point games this year. Then you've got some size inside to deal with as well. Janiah Barker is a 6'4" sophomore, former McDonald's High School All-American, who's averaging better than 12 points, nearly 8 rebounds per game. In fact, she's 9th in the SEC in rebounds, and coming off a 15.9 rebound performance in the win yesterday against Mississippi State. And the other of the Twin Towers, if you will, Lauren Ware, is a 6'5" redshirt junior who transferred after 3 years at Arizona, averaging 9 points, 8 rebounds. In fact, she is 8th in the SEC in rebounding, tied for 6th at the end of the regular season in block shots, has 9 double-doubles on the season. So good guard play, some good size inside for Texas A&M. Could cause some problems for the Gamecocks. South Carolina, in the previous 15 meetings, is 11-4 against Texas A&M. The Gamecocks have won 4 straight, including a 99-64 victory in College Station back on January 21st. Malaysia Fulwiley had 21 points in the win, while Camila Cardoso added 17 points and 13 rebounds. Sanaya Fagan added 15 points. Chloe Kitts had 13, and Tina Paopao had 10, as the Gamecocks shot at a blistering pace. Would like to see that. Shot 67% from the floor, including 7 out of 13 from three-point range and 14 out of 7 from the foul line to win that one going away. Let's hope they can get some more shooting like that here today in a tournament where the shooting hasn't been good for any team in the first 2 days of the tournament. Let's see if the Gamecocks can heat up the nets here in the first of 4 games here today. We'll take a timeout. We'll come back. We'll hear from senior Te-Hina Paopao, who met with the media earlier this week. We'll have that in just a moment. You're listening to Carolina Basketball from Learfield. Back in Greenville, Brad Muller with you on a Friday morning as we get set for basketball. South Carolina getting set to take on the Aggies of Texas A&M in the quarterfinal round of the 2024 SEC Women's Basketball Tournament. Well, senior guard Te-Hina Paopao met with the media earlier this week, most of it about her decision to come back for her 5th year next year, and we'll hear from her now.
Just what all went into the making of the video to announce your comeback? How long have you known, and why did you decide to go ahead and put it out then?
There wasn't a specific time to when I made that decision to come back. I thought the video was a special type of coming out to come back, and it was just a very special moment for me and my family and everyone else. And I thought my dad did a great job doing it. But it's just an amazing feeling to know that I'm coming back, and I definitely wanted to get it out before the SEC tournament and the dance, so I could just lock in on the games and focus on what we need to do. So there wasn't really a specific time. I just wanted to do that.
You say there's not a specific time when you made the decision, but have there been any moments that have stood out to you that helped you make the decision?
Since day one, I mean, I just felt love from day one, the genuine love and support from everyone, the girls, the coaches, and it's been a fun ride, and I'm excited to continue that.
Extra special to have your dad have that moment, to be able to share that with him after all the support all these years.
Yeah, no, I love my dad so much. We've been through a lot together, and just being able to have him be part of the video, that meant so much to me. It was a great blessing, and I'm so grateful for him and my family. And